Hello
Oh,
and
friend.
welcome to New Kinship. This is David Frank, and I'm here with my co-host TJ Espinoza.
Hello.
And if you are new to New Kinship, this is a podcast where we discuss all sorts of different ideas related to sexuality, ethnicity, culture, belonging, desire, local community. So our podcasts cover a wide range, but we've definitely had the privilege of having a lot of stories as well. And all of these and connecting those ideas to our faith in Christ and as we just seek his kingdom and want to see the flourishing of this world. So today we have with us our friend Hannah. Welcome, Hannah.
Yeah.
Hi, David. Hi, TJ. Thanks so much. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I can't remember we first met you a number of years ago. It was at a Revoice conference, right?
Yeah, the Rebirth Conference, I think it was Dallas.
Yeah, I think,
I want
and we
to
just like
say.
somehow got lunch together, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it was great. So Hannah is a Side B Christian from Brazil who's now living in the United States of America. And
That's
yeah,
right.
we're just here to hear her story. We're here to hear your story. Thanks for joining us, Hannah.
Thanks for an invitation. I'm excited to chat with you.
For me, I'm really happy Hannah agreed to come on. We've been part of sort of a movement to develop a Latine, sort of North American, South American, Central American kind of group for Side B Christians. And I've gotten to know her over the past year or so, and it's been great. I admire her spirit, and I look forward to hearing more.
Hannah, would you, just share a little bit about, general background? How long were you in Brazil before you came to the US? Are there particularities about your family and other people who you belong to and what that meant for your faith?
Sure. So I'm one of those third culture kids where people ask, where are you from? And I'm like, well, do you have a few minutes? So I was born in Brazil, moved to Canada,
Hmm.
lived in Canada for about over 2 decades.
Hmm.
And then moved to the States very recently. So I've only been in the States for about 3 years. So I would say I identify as like a Brazilian Canadian.
Oh, even better.
Um, and say, so I'm closest with the people who have been most formative in my faith journey have been my family, my immediate family, so my parents and my sisters. We're spread out all over the place now. One of my sisters is in Europe. The other one's on the very east coast of Canada. I'm in the US. Um, but my parents and my sisters have been the key shapers, I guess you could say, of my faith. And yeah, I think that's the where I'm from kind of question. And Side B Christian didn't really know that this was a term until I was in like my early 20s and I was wrestling with my faith and sexuality and trying to understand sort of where I was gonna go from here. I think, yeah, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself in the questions I'll be asking, but um, yeah, so Side B Christian have sort of been using that terminology since my early 20s. Before, didn't really have words to put to where I sat or like where thought that I fell in the faith and sexuality conversation. Side B as a term, I don't think exists in the Latin American context yet. Maybe they're just saying lado B, like a literal translation. But yeah.
Oh yeah, I've not even thought about that.
Yeah, I don't think there's one term yet to describe what we're doing of Side B-ness, but maybe it
Yeah.
will merge eventually. Yeah. Hannah, I was going to ask, what was your Christian background like? Like, what sort of church are you from? What sort of church did your parents raise you in? And how was that conversation in your church context as you started figuring out that you were a sexual minority? What was that whole process like for you?
So I grew up in a Protestant, charismatic, Baptist sort of space. And my parents grew up, being Protestant and Baptist in Brazil and charismatic. And so that, so before I moved to Canada, I was like less than 6 years old. And so sexuality didn't really come up, but it came up sort of in very subtle ways. Enough that I knew when I had like my first crush. I remember thinking, well, I'm not a boy, so I can't have a crush on this girl. And so something in my surrounding had told me like what the rules were around like love and marriage, etc. And so growing up, very much, my faith is very much informed by that charismatic church setting. And then when we moved to Canada, we joined the Presbyterian Church,
Wow.
which similarly to the Protestant charismatic space, my experience was sort of, there was a bit of like an avoidant approach to sexuality. So in the Latin American context, I felt like I was, it was sort of this subtle, you're not allowed to be gay, but we're not going to talk about it. And then in the Presbyterian context, it was marriage is between man and a woman, the end. So there was a lack of curiosity, I would say, in both spaces. And so I felt like my faith, I was encouraged to nurture my faith, and, church camp, go to youth group, do all of the things. But this one part of my identity, I wasn't really encouraged to be curious about what that meant for my faith.
Often in U.S. Pentecostal spaces, we see a lot of side X, kind of emphasis on forms of conversion therapy or healing in order to, or sometimes even exorcisms in order to deal with same-sex sexual desires. Is there anything that, probably not from when you were young you remember, but something that maybe in continued connections you have to Brazilian spaces or in your family, you picked up on some of those notes at all?
Yes. I think the conversation is changing on a at least in like some family spaces in Latin America. So my family is from what you would consider the Texas of Brazil, very family oriented. The Caro, the ranchers, the like, that whole vibe is like that. Basically, I live in the Brazilian Texas. My family's from the Brazilian Texas, and I think for a long time when I would talk to family members, there was this side X. Side X is still very prevalent, I would say, in Latin American spaces. And when I would talk to family members, I had the impression that if we're going to talk about this conversation, we're going to talk about sexuality and faith, the only way they knew how to talk about it was through the lens of side S. And more recently, I think with the younger generation and my younger cousins and social media, I think more family members are realizing we can't avoid this conversation. Like, we have to be curious about it. And I think that has shifted my conversations with family members, in that I think before there was exactly this side X rhetoric of there can be a before and after. That had not been my experience to date. Like, this before and after of you can make your feelings go away. And so I think more family members are, okay, if somebody is queer and there isn't going to be an after, like a post queerness, what does this mean for how we care for people like as queer Christians? I think that the debate is still, my perception of the family members that I've talked to is that people are still not comfortable with people calling themselves gay Christian, but there is a move away from, we can remove these feelings from people, or we can heal a person's sexuality. I wouldn't say that is representative of the entire country, but I would say in the networks that I'm connected with in Brazil, I think people are realizing that we have to be curious because this conversation isn't going away.
So you said they have softened up on the language wars?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. still say though that people are uncomfortable. Like when I have talked about sexuality and faith, I haven't felt comfortable sharing with family members that I'm side B. And I think it's because in previous conversations about faith and sexuality with family members, I felt like I got so emotional that I haven't felt ready yet to share with my family. And so in those conversations, I have found that when I suggest this idea of somebody being gay and Christian, there is a lot of pushback of why do we need to use the label gay? Why can't we just use the label Christian? So that conversation, I think, is still not there yet in the space that I'm connected to.
Mm-hmm. Do they have preferred language? Are you having these conversations in English or in Portuguese?
In Portuguese. Yeah.
Are they using similar language to like same-sex attracted or people who experience homosexual attractions or?
People, I think, so if I'm remembering correctly, it's mostly people who experience, they will use language of people who experience homosexual attraction.
How do you say that in Portuguese?
You would say pessoas que têm atrações. I would say, so my Portuguese is a little bit, it has that English Portuguese blend. So I make up words sometimes. But when I'm talking to family members, I think I actually would say pessoas que são gay, which are people who are gay. Or I would say which like attraction to atração a mulheres or atração a homens. And I was really trying to lean in my conversations, like, I don't believe that it's possible for these things to be taken away. Like, we have to accept that if somebody's saying they are gay, maybe there are some people who it goes away for, but the great majority of people, it's not something that will go away. So I think I've used the language as, atraição. Yeah. It's very spontaneous, these conversations, because it's not like I don't try to bring it up because with them, it makes me feel like I'm like, oh no, they're going to find out I'm gay. But I'm sure some people are reading in between the lines. They're like, Hannah knows too much about this topic to be straight.
Yeah. How far can you be like, well, I'm just really concerned about my gay friend. Very invested in her
I wanted to go
flourishing.
back. I wanted to go back and ask more like, how did you recognize that you were queer, gay, SSA, lesbian, whatever term you prefer? Yeah, what was that like for you when you were young?
I guess I didn't address that in the beginning of the podcast. So I would identify as not straight, obviously. And I would say in terms of like labels, I will use like queer or gay, even though I would say my attractions are not evenly split. Like, I would say it's much easier for me to be attracted to a woman. I'm open to being attracted to a man, but they have to work way harder, and it takes way harder, and it just doesn't happen as often. And I would say I noticed in elementary school that like I wasn't really curious about boys in the way that my female friends were. I just didn't care what they thought. And I had a lot of close male friends growing up, and one of my sisters was always impressed at how I never developed attraction. And she was like, I'm just so impressed how like you have these close guy friends and you just like don't feel anything. And I'm like, well, it's not hard for me. Like, I don't like I'm like, yeah, I don't have to work hard to not be attracted to them. And I think because I had been told in the church sort of, we don't talk about this and we're not curious about this, even though I felt these things from like 5 years old and beyond, I was never too curious about it. And I sort of lived in this tension of at school, in elementary school, like I think my elementary school in Toronto was one of the first schools to have gay straight alliance. I'm not sure that that's sexual, but we did have like the Gay Straight Alliance when I was in elementary school. So in the school setting, I was told this was in the early 2000s. In the school setting, I was told this is fine, this is okay, and people who are queer or who are gay are safe in this classroom. And so it was this weird tension of, I was like, well, at least like the school environment is encouraging me that this is okay, like I'm safe. Even though I was wrestling with the tension of, in the church context, it was like, we don't talk about this, and I don't feel safe to be curious or to talk about this. And I didn't really feel safe in the school setting to come out. I just felt nice and comfortable that if I were to, this was like a safe space to like identify as queer and gay. And so I would say just throughout school, not that curious about the boys. And when I had like boyfriends, it just wasn't as magical as maybe people had said it was going to be. But it was only really in university once I really came to terms with, okay, these feelings, they're not going anywhere. And I think the way I've been processing my sexuality and my faith wasn't healthy. And then there was sort of this point of, okay, I need to make a choice about how to move forward, because this pushing these feelings aside is not helpful for me. But I think the feelings were always there. I only became curious about them more intentionally in university when I realized that this just pushing them down wasn't healthy or productive for me as a person, but also just me as a Christian.
It sounds like oh, go ahead, Darius Frank.
Well, I was just gonna ask, one thing that's common, or a common difference between male spaces and female spaces growing up, is that there's usually less like anxiety around girls having like emotionally close relationships, maybe even being more like touchy. Was that your experience? Did you find like you had the opportunity to develop like close relationships with girls growing up? Or did this kind of anxiety of like, oh, I think I'm different than other people play and make things different?
So I would say I do think that's interesting that you bring that up, because that's a conversation I've had a lot with my side B male friends, is that I think women in general are encouraged to nurture deep friendships, encouraged to pursue deep friendships. And so I would say is definitely, I have two sisters, was really close with them growing up, and like had close female friendships throughout my school years. And I didn't really feel anxiety, just because I think I wasn't thinking about like dating any of them, but I did have anxiety about just feeling that I was different and not knowing what to do with that, especially when my close friends would be like, oh, I really like this guy, or I have deep crushes. And I remember thinking, what's wrong with me? Why do I just not care about this whole other side of being? So I would say, I think because women are encouraged to nurture deep friendships, the desire for friendship, the desire to feel connected with others, the desire to be in community was met, because women, I think differently than I think side B males that I've been, become friends with, I was really encouraged to nurture those friendships and to, pursue them.
Can I lean in a little bit more? I think with most guys experiencing this lack of, it can be like, oh, well, it's not actually just gay guys who want deeper friendships. It is all guys who want deeper friendships. And so it just plays into like how we're thinking about that experience. But do you, in maybe TJ's language, would you have said, oh, even amongst my gal friends where we're all encouraged to care, was the main difference just that you didn't experience their kind of flirtation with, straight romance and falling for guys? Or did you feel like your affinity for friendship was even stronger than the other gals?
Hmm. I've never thought about these questions.
Sorry,
That's a really good question. I think, I don't know. I think the God knew I needed sisters because I think sisterhood just naturally is a deeper, it doesn't always end this way. Like not all sisters have good dynamics, but you had the privilege of having sisters where I think immigrating from Brazil to Canada sort of forced us to deep friendships. And so I think now that I'm older and I'm entering the phase of more people entering into serious relationships and marriage, I am noticing that how I'm understanding and relating to friendship in this phase of my life is changing. But I think growing up, because most of my friends were single, we all had this desire, this like equal desire for friendship. But I think in this new season where that perhaps that need for friendship or that desire for deep friendship is being met through, not completely, but is in part being satisfied perhaps through like a romantic partner. I think that I'm noticing that how I relate to friendship, it's evolving and it's changing in this season. But I would say growing up, that sort of need for friendship, I felt that it was matched between me and my friends. We both were as equally invested in the friendships.
Thank you.
And I was going to ask, sounded like you had a slow process of coming out to a lot of your community. Yeah, what was that like, that process? There's an end to coming out yet, but maybe you have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. For me, I realized as I began the journey of figuring out what does my faith and sexuality mean, started reading
Hmm.
all of the books that were, that are the hot books that come up when you Google like faith and sexuality. Um, I noticed that I was getting more questions about why am I not dating? And it was bothering me that I felt that I was having to evade the question in a way that felt dishonest. And for me, it was important for my family to know so that they would be mindful when they were talking about faith and sexuality, and also so that they would understand sort of where I am in this conversation. So I decided, okay, I'm going to come out to my family. Also, the political election in Brazil created some tension between me and my family members because not all of them, but some of them, we just disagreed, and I felt really strongly about my positions and my views. And one of the main reasons was just I thought that the rhetoric of one of the political leaders was unhelpful and unkind toward queer people and dangerous even. And so I think for me, those political conversations made me realize, okay, I need people to understand sort of where I sit in this area of my life so that so that we can have more honest and open conversations about everything. So I came out to my family, my immediate family, after years of praying, but 2 years of intentional praying, because my fear in the Latin American context is there's like a fear of bringing shame to your family. There's a lot of this life you carry, your family's name forward, etc. And so I was trying to be mindful of that in like coming out, that I was worried about what family members were going to say of my parents or think of my parents. So came out to my immediate family, and then from that point on, came out to close Christian friends who like I pray with and who I'm intentionally doing life with. But I haven't really shared this with folks who I'm not intentionally doing life with. And I don't know if that will change or not. I mean, obviously, I don't know everybody that's going to see this video or hear this podcast. But I haven't felt the need to broadcast it in a way that like some of my other friends have chosen to, when I was growing up in high school, a lot of people had the coming out post. Never had one of those. I don't know if I will, but yeah, the journey has been slow to coming out, and I have sort of been coming out to people who I'm doing life with. That's sort of been my approach. Is if this person is somebody who I'm doing life with, then I want to share this with them because naturally it's going to come up as we do life together.
Related, um, partially I think in some Christian spaces they're like, well, why do you guys want to talk about your sexuality so much? It's like, it's just part of our life. And so I'm curious if this specific avenue of vulnerability and sharing with your family, your friends, if either for yourself or other people in your community, has it opened the doors to maybe not vulnerability around sexuality, but other places where people are like, oh, if Hannah can open up about this, maybe I can open up. Or maybe your sharing was preceded by other people's vulnerability.
Yeah, I definitely think my sharing created a space for more people. Like, I think sharing of all vulnerabilities, as you were saying, I think even conversations about mental health and therapy. I think the fact that I came out when I have only started therapy recently, but once I started therapy, it was like everyone is so supportive and just like a recommendation, any queer people that you meet who are queer and Christian or same-sex attraction and Christian, the moment they come out, I feel like it should be mandatory that you attend a therapy session the day after that. And I feel like churches should help cover the cost of therapy. But yeah, so I do think that they're in being honest and being open about like sex and sexuality, it created a space in my family context and in even my friend context where I think people feel more comfortable bringing the vulnerability forward because it's like, oh, well, Hannah's gay, so it's like, I don't know why, but that just created an opening for people to be like, oh, I need, being more candid when talking about things that they need prayer for or things that they're struggling with. I definitely think that this opened, yeah, more sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of, just like tangential fruit that comes from the work of God and in queer lives.
Yeah.
So what have you felt like has been most helpful for you in this era of kind of being a Christian and being queer, gay? Yeah, because it sounds like you've been coming out over time, you've been processing, you've been reading, connecting with other people in your church or your circles. Yeah, what has been helpful for you?
Oh, also, were
I think
any of those books specifically ones that you'd recommend or highlight?
recommend. There's one that I read recently, Still Time to Care, that I read it very recently, and I think it should be mandatory reading for people who are asking questions about what does it mean how can I walk alongside folks who are same-sex attracted Christians in the church today. I think that book to me stands out. Sam Allberry wrote a book. That was the first book that I read because I think his name is the first name that comes up when you go Fear to Sexuality. I think it was like, is homosexuality a sin? I think that might have been the most. And for me, what stood out in that book was, I think it was Sam who mentioned this, but the example that we have of a perfect human is Jesus, and Jesus was single. And I think that sort of framework is something that I've used in my conversations with straight Christian friends, that Jesus is the example that we have of a perfect human. He is also the example that we have of how to live a fulfilled life. And so this idea that you cannot have fulfillment in singleness is false. And so that book, I don't know if I would read it again today and have the same takeaways, but because it was my entry into this space, it was really helpful to have that framing. And he did a talk at University of Toronto many years ago, and he shared or used another framing that I found helpful, which was that, I'm paraphrasing here, I'm not quoting him, but I'm trying to capture the sentiment of what he said, which was like, love love is not going to be perfect, whether it's straight or it's queer, and all love is broken. And I think sometimes that gets lost in church spaces, that there is brokenness in straight marriages. There's brokenness in like that sort of, yeah, love in all of its expressions. And so I think for me, that was also liberating, just to move away from this idea that there is like perfect love and then there's like imperfect love. Like love in this lifetime is going to be imperfect. And the question about this phase of my life, I think something that has been helpful is people talk about like the queer people having like an adolescent phase in their 20s, like once they come out. I didn't experience that. But I think what has been helpful for me in this phase of life is that you need people who, I think for Christians who come out later in life, or the people who come out later in life and are wrestling with like faith and sexuality, having people who you can be just completely honest with has been really helpful. And so for me, the side B space, having people who just resonate with, oh, I feel this way. Oh, I felt that too. Here's how I navigated it. And sort of accepting and just reconciling that we can be queer and we can be Christian. We can experience same-sex attraction and we can be Christian. Like these two things don't have to be in tension with one another. It's been helpful for me to walk alongside other Christians who are wrestling with the tension and like continuing to choose God day in and day out. So Side B community has been very helpful. I think alongside that, a lot of my Side B friends see therapists, and having them share that experience and share how helpful it is has helped me realize, okay, I can't just read my Bible and pray and ask for prayer. I also need professional help. And so that's been something that I've tapped into in this season of my life. And something that I had heard Side B Christians talk about, that I was like, oh, well, women can have deep friendships. Like, when my friends get married, I'm going to be fine. Like, you boys, it's just different for you because, like, you guys, like, whatever. And now that I'm in the season where a lot of my friends are getting married and our dynamics are changing, I'm realizing that, okay, so it's being queer and Christian sort of has different phases, and it's gonna look different from every person, but it is helpful to know it's normal. This is like a phase. This is what happens in this stage. Here are the things that have been helpful for me. And so for me, what has been helpful is actually being honest with people about, hey, this is really hard for me because, you know, our dynamics are changing and I have felt more distant, or just learning how to be vulnerable in a way that's healthy and in a way that like communicates that human need for connection, for community without overwhelming friends. And so I think I'm learning in this season, what has been helpful is like learning how to talk about my feelings in a way that is helpful for me, is helpful for others to know how they can care and support for me in this season. Yeah, so I think there's that self-acceptance phase. You need Side B Christian to like just learn how to love yourself in a way that maybe depending on the church context that you grew up in or the family context you grew up in, you haven't fully stepped into that. I'm a beloved, like child of God, and he made no mistake in how he has made me. And I think once that stage sort of matures, you learn how to like seek support from people who might not be queer. And so I have a lot of straight women friends who are great allies and great support system, but it required me being completely honest and vulnerable about my faith and sexuality journey. So in this season, the friendship stuff that I was alluding to, I'm re-exploring what does friendship mean in this season of my life. And I had never thought about seasons of my life. I was just living my life. And now I'm like, wait, there are seasons, and how is God like wanting to draw near to me in this season? So yeah, I would say in this season, I'm learning how to cultivate friendships, learning how to cultivate my friendships differently as like friends who are pursuing marriage, pursue marriage. What does that mean for me and my need for friendship and my need for community? And how can I move towards that need in a way that's healthy for me, that's healthy for my community? Yeah.
And have your have the married friends been like sympathetic, or have those conversations gone well? And how much
Yeah.
in, I don't, depending on where they are, whether they're just dating, getting engaged, married, having children,
Okay.
have there also been requests from them of like, oh, I actually, are they more needy in certain ways of like, especially think about if they're having children, it's like, I just need someone to hold my baby.
Yeah. I would say that I think sometimes there's like stories we tell ourselves and that are untrue. And so what has been helpful in these conversations with my married friends, been like, oh, they don't have time for me anymore. They're too busy with their husbands and they don't care about our friendship. And then meeting with them and hearing like, actually, we're so aware of the fact that you've like chosen side B and this is like not a easy decision, that we've actually been intentional to try to make you not feel that. And so I think just being honest with people about, okay, I'm feeling this way. And I think in learning what my needs are, which is not even so much faith and sexuality, but understanding like what my needs are has made me more aware of how I can care for my married friend. And so I think, yeah, it had, I wouldn't say that we are equally needy. I would say we have different needs, and I'm learning what their needs are, and they're learning what my needs are. And yeah, I think the vulnerability piece is a key part of that, because if we're not vulnerable with others, then there's no way for them to know how to care for us. And I think as side B Christians, um, if we're going to be doing life, you know, alone in quotation mark, we're not going to be couple, then we need to be really intentional about like just being open with the people who are part of our community, who are part of our family. So I have found my married friends really receptive. And to David's point, like I'm also intentional. If I'm going to hang out with a friend who's married and has 3 kids, I'm making lunch and I'm bringing it over so we can talk as, we eat lunch. And yeah, I would say understanding that they have needs that need to be cared for as much as we have needs to be cared for. And so I think this season has just required me to be even more aware of that, because
You had any of your friends try to convince you to be side A? Like, it could be straight or queer friends. Just say, like, why not side A, Hannah? Like, why not?
yeah, and I think so one of the questions that, yeah, I think I have had friends who they hope that one day I will just like choose side A. And I think for me, what may be unique in my position is that there wasn't a compelling argument that I read that made me decide to be side B. For me, it was a spiritual conviction. And so once I came to terms with my sexuality, I was like, well, maybe I could be side A. And when I've had opportunities to sort of pursue that, I've just not felt peace at all. And I'm somebody who very much goes with like my conviction of like how I feel. And yeah, and so even when that question has been raised, I've felt the most at peace when I've been just obedient to the conviction that God has placed in my heart. I don't know that I can say anything to convince somebody to be side B. And I think ultimately that's a decision that people have to make on their own. But until this point in my life, I have felt like really strong convictions about being side B. And yeah, when I've tried and I thought, maybe I could go side A, the peace that I feel when I'm walking in my side B convictions, I haven't experienced when I've like tried to move in the side A direction. And I think for me, it's because I have the conviction that God has not called me to be with another woman romantically. And so what I have felt is that if I'm going to love this person to the best of my ability, and I'm going to love them well, I'm going to love them in the way that I feel peace about, in the way that God has started giving me conviction that I can love them well. And that's like just loving them really well as a friend. That's what gives me the greatest amount of peace. It's not always easy. I mean, it's never easy, but I don't think I would trade the peace that I feel in walking in what I feel is like obedience to how I feel God is calling me to walk for anything. You can buy a lot of things in this world, you cannot buy peace. And if obedience gives me peace, I'm willing to be obedient so I can have that peace. That isn't to say I'm also I'm in having peace, I'm avoiding the other hard emotions. I think with peace also comes like heartache and pain and sadness and sorrows. But that's just part of being a human. We feel a spectrum of emotions. And I think there's a lot of things like you can trade up, and I'm not willing to trade peace, because when I don't have peace, life is not fun. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm. It reminds me of, a friend was just recently sharing that, like, whoa, when I started pursuing side B, I just felt life becoming more integrated and felt more connected to the reality that God has made. And yeah, I can resonate with that. You earlier said, quote, alone, the aloneness of singleness, but obviously you're pursuing these friendships intentionally. How have you, whether in this season or as you look towards future seasons, what are ways that you are thinking about, putting down roots in relationships and community? What have you dreamed about?
I haven't. So this is something that recently I've been thinking more about, because I haven't thought about it much until recently, because my family, even though I've been living here for the past few years, my family has always sort of been my root, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. And now that I've becoming more aware of what my needs are and realizing, hey, I need more intentional time with side B folk. And yeah, I think as I look into the future, and I think my friends are becoming aware of this, my married friends, is I want to be more integrated in my like married friends' lives. And so what does that mean in terms of like supporting them, caring for their kids, acting as like an auntie to friends who I'm not like related to by blood. And I think I'm becoming more curious about what are the gifts that God has given me, and how does God want to use these gifts, over the next season. And I'm feeling the desire to be more intentional about laying roots. I'm in this transition phase where I might be moving in the next year. So I'm thinking like, okay, if I were to move, what do I want this new season to be? And I think community requires a lot of intentionality. And so for me, I want to be more intentional about it being integrated with my friends, caring for them caring for me. And not expecting things to just like happen. It's nice when like, things just happen, but realizing that it's actually going to be a lot of work, and I need to put in the work in order to sort of get this community that I'm desiring. Because it's impossible. I think it's impossible to walk side B and to live side B without being in community with others. And as I'm anticipating more and more friends getting married, I'm like, okay, what is it going to look like for me to build a community that is nourishing to me, that is nourishing to them, that honors, like, advances basically the kingdom of God on earth is like the first thing you said in the podcast. So I think it's just going to require a little bit more work on my part. When you're in school with folks, there's this natural coming together. When you go to church, you see them on Sundays, I'm realizing that that's not enough for me. Like I really want to be doing life with people. So the doing life is in, you're supporting your friends' kids at their shows or, celebration, whatever. And that more organic seeing friends on weekends and having them stop by, whatever. Yeah, I know the Side B space has a lot more of these like intentional communities. And I think I'm not sure that's where I'm at yet. I could see myself there in the future, but definitely being more, yeah, just integration, I think, with other people's lives, not being as passive.
Mm. Yeah. No, I think it's so
I'm
well said.
curious.
We have things. We sometimes just assume that, oh, life will just fall in together, the puzzle will self-assemble.
Mhm.
But it takes a lot of
Yeah.
sometimes engineering and especially appreciate your emphasis on the like intentional, vulnerable conversations of like, what do we mean to each other? How can we actually love each other well?
And just to add to that point, something that my therapist actually said to me was, Hannah, you have chosen to be side Bs. And so I think sometimes it's like, well, this thing was like done to me, like, I'm being forced to be side B. It's like, okay, no, this is the conviction that I feel and that I'm choosing to live by. And so what does it mean to live a life where I've chosen this and I'm like building a life around that feels just really, and so that's something else with like talking about like the next season is okay, this is not something that was done to me. I have chosen to be side B. And if I'm going to continue to be side B, then here are the things that I need to like live um just more to feel more fruitful in this new season of claiming this conviction that I feel God has put on my heart. That as much as like there are definitely moments where I'm like, I wish I was side A. It just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I just don't feel peace. So I'm like, okay, this conviction that I'm feeling is not going away. How can I lean into it and like experience and taste and see that the Lord is good amid,
Mhm.
this.
What has what have side A women's spaces been like for you? Because that's a very, I think it's a particular experience that
Yeah.
that David Frank and I don't know much about. So I'm curious what your take has been.
I've avoided side A spaces mostly because I'm I'm afraid of being judged for being side B.
Hmm.
And so I haven't really leaned into side A women's spaces. I think now that I'm more confident in my convictions and in sort of the direction that I feel God inviting me to walk, I would feel more confident to engage inside a spaces. Recently, I have become more friends with people who are affirming but straight. And so that had been really cool to just share, our walk of faith and like to be able to pray together, talk about Bible stories together. Still disagreeing on this point, but walking together in our faith journey. Like with my neighbor who I've become really close with, she's straight, but she's side A. And I think even reckoning with my own prejudices before that I was like, oh, like, these people don't understand the Bible, even though my convictions and my sexuality are very much Holy Spirit led first. I don't really have a passage I can point to where I'm like, this is why I'm side B. It's really been like a Holy Spirit based conviction. And so it's been interesting for me to pray with her and read the Bible together and be like, I need to like just some prejudices that I had that God sort of like challenging me on. And I think for her as well, challenging her on like what a side B mean. Like she sees my walk, she sees my day to day, and she knows my conviction. And I know that has like an impact, even like it's like yeah, we don't have words to put to it yet about like the impact that our mutual just our shared friendship is gonna shape our walk of faith, but I'm sure that I'm the only side B person she knows because she didn't know what side B was. So it's good to put ourselves in those spaces and invite conversations. But I would say my experience has been I haven't had too much connection with side A spaces, and yeah, I think for me there is fear there to share like, oh, I'm side B, and not knowing how it will be received, which is an assumption I'm making, and I don't think it's a fair assumption, but it's just, yeah, I think people aren't always super receptive to the side B position, and I don't always have the energy to debate.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that. TJ and I just came back from QCF, which is a side A space. And when most people are kind of moving from like a side X-ish or some type of condemnatory background and then going to side A, they just associate anything that's not their conviction with like the homophobia, the condemnation of their whole personhood. And it's like hard to just be like, oh, you're repressed. And you're like, oh, I don't feel like I am.
Yeah. The repressed question, I think, comes up. And for me, I think it was Eve touched in her book. The convictions that I have, I don't know that I would feel comfortable telling others, like, this is what you should do. But this is the conviction that I have. And this is, how I feel God calling you to live my life. So it's also unique in that way, perhaps, that it's not prescriptive. It's just, hey, this is how I feel the Lord has moved in me, and this is what I feel God is calling me to. This is how I feel God is calling me to live out my, my Christian life. I think maybe I'll get to a point where I'm like more, this is the way, but I'm not quite there yet.
Well, let your light shine. And people can see the beauty of it, which is, definitely, one of our starting convictions with this podcast is people won't accept the truth if they can't also see how it's good and beautiful. And so just trying to show that fullness of how we can walk in the truth in good and beautiful ways that lead to our flourishing, ways that hopefully, reveal God's glory at work in our world. And then people are like, oh, maybe it could be true.
Yeah, it's true. I think for me, I've been really moved by the example of like my side B male friends specifically. There aren't many side B women in Raleigh that I am connected with, and so all of my primary connections are with the side B men. But it's my sisters they tease me because they're like, you guys celebrate everything, and so it's like somebody's been living in the city for 1 year, party. Somebody's been living in the city for 2 years, party. And just like finding occasions to get together and to just celebrate life. And so for me, it's been encouraging to just walk alongside people who have so boldly stepped into how their faith and sexuality meet, and sort of lead by example of like, this is what it can look like. So
on that, just in terms of like, you haven't found a lot of side B women in your local area. Have you found some other side B women that you've been able to build connections? Because I know side B spaces at times are dominated by men, and curious what your experience has been with other women. And
yeah, I think so. The women who I have met and have built close friendships with have been women who I've met through the Revoice conference. That space, I haven't really met other side B women. And this is something I've thought about, here and there. Just, my perception is that it's easier, or like there's more history of men coming out in the church as gay than there is history of like women coming out in the church as lesbian. Like from a young age, it was like, oh yeah, gay men exist. I don't know a single woman in church growing up who was openly queer, even though there were women who were like 70, 80, always lived alone. Not saying that they were queer and they had to be married, but some of them I'm like, my gaydar was like, I feel like this woman maybe was queer. And so I think there's still that, yeah, I think there's still that invisible maybe wall. I don't know if it's a wall or what it is, but I do find that I'm more likely to meet like a queer man who's Christian in the church than a queer woman. And maybe it goes back to our question of friendship that we talked about earlier, in that need and desire for friendship or intimacy is being met in other ways that women don't feel the need to like share. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but I have definitely noticed that like almost all of my closest side B friendships are with like beautiful, wonderful, amazing men of God. But yeah, I would love to have more side B woman friends, but I have found that yeah, they're harder to come by maybe. I'm not sure.
Mhm. In any of your sharing of your own experience, have there been women who, you know, for maybe even think of themselves as straight, but like, oh, I've actually had some crushes on women before too, and it's
Yeah, that has happened. I haven't always known how to react. I'm like, I don't know if you're coming out or you're just like, you know, putting an idea out there. But for the most part, the women who have come out who have are like very, very confident in their straight sexuality. But there have been occasions where I'm like, okay, thanks for sharing.
yeah,
Yeah.
because yeah, I could imagine, that for people where it's like more clear that like, oh, I don't experience attraction to this sex and I do for this one, of the same sex, and that if there's a lot of women who maybe one of the reasons being like either more bifluidity or something, and that
Yeah.
it, yeah, less impetus to need to talk about it, and so maybe it's been more in process. They've had opportunities to still be close to women, and
Yeah. No, I did have a friend who's married and was like a new church friend a few years ago. And I was new to the city, and then I got asked the question because of my age, like, oh, like, are you dating? And I was like, no, I'm not dating. And then I was like, you know what? I don't want this question to come up again. And I was like, no, I'm not dating. Actually, I'm gay. And he was like, oh, like, and I was like, yep, all my friends here are men, and all of them are gay too. And she was like, oh, yeah, I don't know how she worded it, but basically she was like, she was like, yeah, you've experienced attraction to women as well. And I was like, cool. So that was interesting. She's married, but it was interesting, like in that vulnerability of like me sharing, she shared as well. So maybe maybe there is a point there of like in my sharing more openly, more women will emerge from the woodwork who would consider themselves like side B.
yeah, 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 it's interesting. Have come to the conclusion that things are not simple for a lot of people in their sexuality.
That's true.
And
Yeah. But I think as churches become better at talking about faith and sexuality and like equips their staff to talk about it, I hope that it will be easier for the younger generation to process and heal and sort of reconcile what it means to be like a queer Christian. Um, so yeah,
Mhm.
definitely seeing progress, but it it takes time.
Are you hopeful that Do you see a lot of like a strong pace of progress among your Brazilian relatives and networks, or is that a slower process?
It has felt lower, but I'm not there like in the day to day, so it's hard to know. Like maybe they're having like way more conversations than I realize. There's a lot of straight people having conversations about faith and sexuality, and I'm hoping that like more queer people will be the ones leading the conversations about faith and sexuality, just because straight people can only speak so much, and then it's like, okay, you need somebody who has lived experience, you know, addressing this topic and speaking to the church. So I would definitely say there's progress, but I think if I were to move back to Latin America, I would probably need to be more vocal about this just because I think some of the rhetoric is harmful, that I have heard in Christian spaces when I visited family. And it's the kind of rhetoric where, okay, now that you said that, if anybody in here was about to go to a church leader to ask for prayer or for questions about faith and sexuality, it's just been clearly communicated that that's not going to be well received. So that person is just going to keep it to themselves for a few more years. And I think when, part of the body of Christ is hurting, the entire body is hurting. So it's just, yeah, I think the conversation is moving forward, but I don't think there are as many queer voices leading the conversation as I think would be helpful to have. But also safety is the issue of safety, I think maybe is different in the Latin American context than in the North American context. So I'm sure that seeps into it as well.
Especially in maybe the Texas part of Brazil.
Yeah.
I really appreciate getting this insight into your life a bit more, Hannah. And also all the wisdom you have, especially around kind of therapy and thinking through how to pursue these questions in a kind of integrated way. So I just wanted to, yeah, do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with our listeners who might be from a similar place or maybe even a different place from where you are?
No, I think the main, just going to the therapy thing, I think I have found that really helpful, and I wish it had been communicated to me earlier. I think it was, maybe I just ignored it, how important it is to, yeah, just to see a therapist. I think as a side B Christian, especially if you have just complicated church history or haven't felt like if it took you a while to come out, you probably need to see a therapist. Maybe even if you came out early, you still need to see a therapist. So my final recommendation would be to lean into that. And yeah, I think understand that your need for friendship and your need for community is going to look different every season. So what worked maybe last year and the previous season might not work in this new season. So being in touch with what are my needs in this season of life, and how is God inviting me to care for those needs, and just like really lean into what does it mean to care for myself and for my faith in different seasons, and being okay that it might look different. Like something that worked in the past might not work in this new season. So getting curious about what your needs are and not feeling like you're not needy for having needs. Like everybody has needs. Just figure out like, caring for yourself and caring for your needs in different seasons gonna look like that.
Was it hard to find a therapist? I know some side B people are hesitant because either it's someone who has no idea about their convictions or they're questioning them.
So I maybe had luck in that I went to, so the church I attend is aware of side B. They're not like actively preaching about it, but like sexuality comes up here and there. But sorry, the church that I was attending at the time, so I'm attending different church now, but this church that I was attending at the time, they would be like women's workshops with a Christian therapist, and she would she made a list of recommended therapists. And so then I did my research, looked all of them up. My therapist was not familiar with side B spaces until I told her of a side B, and she's like, "Oh, what's that? Tell me more." But I haven't found it a problem. Like it hasn't been a hint. Like I have found therapy with her helpful, despite her having to probably have to do her own research about what is side B. But I prayed a lot about, like, for years I had wanted to go to therapy, and so I would say praying as you think about a therapist, and also inviting others into the journey, so that if it becomes unhelpful, or if something about the therapy is like not helping you live more freely or just like be yourself, having that accountability of a friend of like, hey, I'm starting to be a therapist, like having people who can be a sounding board in case therapist is unhelpful. I know there are side B specific therapists, but I feel like it's a bit of a journey to figure out whose side B is. That was just like, if you believe in God, we can try to figure out the other part.
Well, I'm so glad to hear. Yeah, I do think the Center for Faith and some other friends have tried to develop a trusted network. So potentially listeners in your city, there might be already established ones. But kudos or ditto to everything Hannah just said about just going in prayerfully and trusting for the Lord to work. And having friends as to help counsel and be a sounding board.
And
Yeah,
just to build off of that, I think having people in your church who you can be honest with. So like I shared with people in my community group that I was going to start seeing a therapist. And so I think having that just added layer of sharing with people you're in therapy, because it's supposed to make things better. And so if it's making it worse, it's not, I think there's like an opportunity to reevaluate.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, thank you so much, Hannah. It's been, I feel like, a couple of years since we've been able to connect. So this is really good to just hear more of how your story and how you're processing things at this time. And maybe we'll have a follow-up in your next season of life.
Fine.
That sounds good. I want to thank you both also for creating this space. I think for Side B Christians, it can be really hard to find podcasts, or now not as hard, but when I started out, like it was harder to come by like resources. And for me, it was really helpful to just hear other people's stories, like hear about, the whole journey. And so I just appreciate that you guys are taking the time to share these narratives, because the Bible is written in narrative format for a reason. Narratives have power. And so I'm really glad that y'all are just dedicating time to creating resources to help other people as they navigate their walk of faith.
Thanks so much.
Well, with that blessing that I've received, I wish all y'all listeners well. And yeah, thanks for joining for this story. God bless y'all. If you want to support our work, tell a friend about it. Share an episode that you enjoyed. People who value this podcast usually find it through someone. If you'd like to help us cover costs, you can also become a supporter on Substack. While all episodes are available to current and future listeners, paid subscribers get a couple extra sign-up perks.